People think they know the Beatles. Four charming lads, clean suits, screaming fans, music that floated through time like a perfect postcard from the 60s. But under that polished mythology sits a stranger truth. Nothing about this band was as simple as the world assumed. Their rise wasn't just talent and timing, it was obsession, reinvention, chaos, rivalry, rumor storms, and decisions that reshaped culture so deeply we barely notice them anymore. Even today, their legacy keeps mutating. Secret tapes resurfacing, eerie theories refusing to die, and a final song emerging from technology that didn't exist in their lifetime. So let's rewind. Before the world tours and the headlines, before the mythology swallowed reality, there were four young men on the edge of nowhere trying to carve their names into history. In dim basements and sweaty clubs, they weren't legends yet. They were hungry, restless, rough around the edges. Their story begins not with fame, but with failure after failure and a city that was never meant to be a global launchpad. Liverpool wasn't glamorous. It was a port town with a reputation for grit, not glory. But sometimes lightning strikes where no one expects, and once it lit them up, there was no going back. Behind the interviews and photo-friendly humor, there was a drive bordering on obsession. Every gig was a battlefield to win over audiences who didn't care who they were yet. Every song was a challenge to top the last. Every step forward came with whispers, pressure, and critics waiting for them to fade like every other teenage craze. They refused to fade. They evolved faster than their rivals could react. That speed terrified the music world. But fame has a price. And as the world fell in love with their harmonies, other forces, rumor, media frenzy, myth-making, started creeping in. People saw what they wanted, not what was real. They built legends, chased clues, imagined secrets. And the Beatles, knowingly or not, fed that curiosity with symbolism, mystique, and sudden shifts no one could predict. This isn't the story of a pop band. It's the story of a cultural force so powerful that nearly 60 years later, we're still trying to decode it. And the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Their early days, their hidden tapes, their rivalries, the conspiracy theories, the modern AI resurrection. All part of a picture the world never fully understood. And once those floodlights hit them, things only got more intense. Because their origin story was wild. But what came next? That would shake the world. But that was only the beginning. The real transformation started in a place few expected. When most bands were learning three chords in their parents' garages, the Beatles were grinding through 8-hour nights in the heat and cigarette haze of Hamburg's clubs. Germany wasn't glamorous. It was raw, neon-lit, and dangerous around the edges. They slept in a tiny room behind a cinema screen. Their diet was cheap bread rolls and whatever coffee they could afford. It wasn't fame, it was survival. They didn't walk into greatness polished and sweet. Hamburg beat the innocence out of their sound. It sharpened them. The Beatles who returned to England sounded like a different species than the boys who had left. They went from stiff amateurs to a machine locked in rhythm, swagger, and nerve. That transformation never would have happened in a safe environment. Greatness needs friction. People romanticize early Beatles performances like they were charming neighborhood gigs. The truth? Those crowds weren't soft. They were rowdy, restless, and sometimes hostile. The band had to fight for every clap, every nod of approval. Mistakes weren't forgiven. Boredom killed careers. Hamburg forced them to evolve or disappear. And in between the sweat-drenched sets, they lived like young men with dreams too big for their pockets. Long nights, stupid decisions, friendships forged through chaos, arguments flaring then dissolving in laughter or exhaustion. They weren't icons yet. They were human. And that humanity is what fueled everything later. The creativity, the conflicts, the brotherhood, the cracks. Hamburg also introduced something the world rarely associates with them: vulnerability. They weren't invincible. They got kicked out of the country at one point because of visa trouble. They had nights when they felt like they were going nowhere. The mythology makes success look faded. It wasn't. They scraped for every inch. By the time they returned home, they hit stages like they owned them. People noticed. Suddenly, they weren't another band. They were the band. And fame began to stir like a storm building on the horizon. But fame brings shadows. And once the world embraced the Beatles, mysteries followed close behind. Because people don't just listen to legends, they analyze them, obsess over them, invent secrets for them. And that's where one of the strangest chapters in music history began. Because soon, fans would start hearing more than harmonies in their records. They started hearing clues. No band in history attracted stranger speculation than the Beatles. And nothing hit harder than the eerie theory claiming Paul McCartney didn't survive the 60s and was replaced by a look-alike. It didn't start as a serious movement, just whispers, curiosity. But curiosity has a habit of snowballing online even decades before the internet existed. Soon, listeners were dissecting album covers like crime scenes, analyzing lyrics like coded confessions. "Turn Me On, Dead Man" played backward. A barefoot Paul crossing Abbey Road. Fans convinced themselves the clues were everywhere. Was it real? Of course not. Paul himself has laughed at it. But the rumor refused to die because it revealed something deeper. People sensed there was always more beneath the Beatles' surface. Their sudden artistic leaps, their secretive studio sessions, their fascination with symbolism. The band seemed to invite interpretation simply by existing. This wasn't the only time speculation took over. Some swore they saw hidden messages in Sgt. Pepper's art. Others believed they used studio tricks not yet invented. Rumors spread about inner tension long before anyone admitted it. And the more they tried to stay private, the more the public imagined wild explanations for everything. The Beatles didn't fight the mystery. In some ways, they fed it. Cryptic interviews, sudden creative pivots, playful hints, a refusal to fit into neat categories. They didn't just change music, they changed how fans interacted with artists. They turned pop listening into detective work, and once an audience gets hooked on mystery, they crave more. The Paul rumor wasn't dark in the modern sense. It was folklore, like Elvis sightings or moon landing conspiracies. It showed how impossible it was to separate the Beatles from myth. They weren't just musicians anymore. They were symbols, puzzles, cultural DNA. And as the 60s blurred into a more uncertain era, something else strange happened. A different band stepped into the spotlight and set off one of the most confusing fan theories of the decade. Because some listeners became convinced the Beatles hadn't broken up at all, that they'd returned in secret, under a new name. Sometime after the Beatles split, a mysterious band called Klaatu released an album with no member credits, no backstory, and a sound suspiciously reminiscent of the Fab Four experimenting in a new era. Listeners raised eyebrows. Then theories erupted like rockets. Was this the Beatles reborn under a secret identity? Were they testing the world to see if timeless music still spoke without the brand name? Magazines and radio hosts fed the speculation. Some swore the voices sounded like John and Paul. Others pointed to musical clues, production style, or the whimsical storytelling that felt so Beatle-esque it couldn't be coincidence. Fans didn't just want to believe, they needed to. The breakup had left a void. People chased the hope that the magic never really stopped. Klaatu wasn't the Beatles. Eventually, it came out they were Canadian musicians with their own vision and no secret membership roster. But the episode proved something essential. The world wasn't ready to let go. Beatles fans weren't ordinary music lovers. They were detectives, dreamers, protectors of a mythology bigger than the band itself. Call it obsession or dedication. It set the Beatles apart in history. Most groups fade. They had imitators while still alive, rumors long after, and tribute acts that fill stadiums half a century later. Not because nostalgia is strong, but because artistic fingerprints that deep don't wash off culture. And while the world chased false clues, real secrets were brewing. Hidden tapes, alternate takes, private recordings sealed away like buried treasure. If Klaatu satisfied fantasies, these recordings fed hunger. Because nothing excites fans more than the promise that there's still unheard Beatles music in the vaults. And oh, there was. What surfaced next shocked collectors, historians, and the industry. Because when unauthorized recordings spilled into the world, people got a peek behind the curtain no myth could match. The Beatles studio wasn't just a workplace, it was a playground for invention. They tore apart traditional recording rules and rebuilt them as they went. Tape loops, unusual mic placements, instruments used in ways no engineer had seen. They didn't ask permission. They experimented until sound bent to their imagination. But here's what most didn't know. Hundreds of hours of unreleased recordings existed, tucked away like lost scrolls. Basement takes, half-finished ideas, studio chatter that revealed friendships, tensions, jokes, frustration, bursts of genius. Fans didn't just want polished tracks. They wanted to hear creation happen. So bootlegs appeared, copies leaked, whisper networks traded tapes like contraband. Suddenly, the legends weren't statues. They were human. Hearing them stumble, argue, laugh, and build masterpieces from scraps changed everything. Genius wasn't magic. It was relentless refinement. Chords changed, lyrics evolved, harmonies formed like puzzle pieces shifting into place. It proved creativity isn't lightning from the sky. It's sweat, stubbornness, and a willingness to tear down your own ideas until they shine. In a world obsessed with overnight success, the tapes told another truth. Even the greatest worked harder than anyone guessed. Some recordings shocked fans not because they were perfect, but because they weren't. Loose jams, failed attempts, instrumental experiments that went nowhere. Those messy pieces didn't ruin the legend. They strengthened it. Suddenly, every fan glimpse felt intimate, like sneaking into a sacred creative temple. And as collectors hunted these tapes, the real world outside the studio began closing in. Business decisions shifted, tensions rose, personal paths diverged. The more perfect the music became, the more fragile the unity behind it turned. Because creating history doesn't protect you from pressure. In fact, it usually invites it. And soon, pressure cracked what no one thought could break. Success looks beautiful from the outside. Inside, it can feel like a ticking clock. The Beatles climbed higher than anyone expected, and at the peak, weight pressed from every angle. Creative differences weren't whispers anymore. Business partners clashed. Managers stirred conflict. Lawyers lurked like storm clouds. And the band that once moved as one started pulling in different directions. It wasn't one moment. It was dozens. Tiny disagreements that added up like grains of sand tipping a scale. John finding new artistic inspiration and wanting freedom. Paul feeling desperate to keep the momentum alive. George aching for his songs to shine instead of waiting behind Lennon-McCartney. Ringo caught in the middle, loyal but weary. They still loved each other, but love strains under pressure. Creative chemistry doesn't always equal emotional harmony. Fans imagined betrayal. Reality was sadder and simpler. Humans evolve. Dreams diverge. And when you build the world's biggest band, there's no easy exit. Their split wasn't scandal. It was gravity. Too much weight, too little breathing room. too many voices telling them who to be. Fame isn't always a spotlight. Sometimes it's a cage dressed as glory. Yet even as they separated, something strange happened. Their influence didn't fade, it exploded. Every artist wanted the freedom they carved. Every studio learned from their experiments. Every fan clung to the music as if it could rewind time. But endings don't erase legacy, they freeze it. And once frozen, legends stop being people and start becoming puzzles. People looked backward, hunting for signals they missed, symbols, hints, proof that the breakup wasn't real or was inevitable from the start. The more they tried to move on, the more the world pulled them back. And decades later, when no one expected it, technology cracked open the time capsule. Suddenly, a voice from the past emerged, and the Beatles returned, not physically, but in sound, a memory resurrected with modern tools. The world didn't just listen, it held its breath. Years passed. Fans grew older. New generations discovered the music like buried treasure. Nobody thought they'd ever hear new Beatles material again. Then, technology stepped in. Old demos, once too damaged to restore, were suddenly clear, thanks to modern software pulling voice from noise like a ghost emerging from fog. When the final Beatles song surfaced, it wasn't gimmick nostalgia, it was the past shaking hands with the present. Hearing familiar harmonies again felt surreal, like opening a door you thought was sealed forever. Listeners weren't just hearing a new track, they were hearing time itself bend. It sparked debates. Should technology revive voices from history? Is restoration honoring legacy or risking distortion? People disagreed, but one thing was undeniable. The emotional punch hit hard. What made the Beatles extraordinary wasn't just their era, it was their timelessness. And suddenly, they weren't a memory, they were current again. Younger audiences flooded comments. Older fans cried. The band who shaped yesterday stepped back into today, not as relics, as living art. It proved something powerful. Legacy isn't about nostalgia, it's about relevance. And even decades after breaking up, the Beatles still stirred global conversation faster than most artists releasing brand new albums. The song wasn't just a release, it was a reminder. Cultural gravity doesn't fade, it only waits. And if that wasn't enough, rumors rose again. If AI could revive old demos, what else could surface? Were there more tapes, more fragments, more whispers from the vault? Fans started digging again, hungry. The cycle restarted, curiosity reborn. Because once a mystery band, always a mystery band. But here's the twist. After all the speculation, the clues, the conspiracies, the late-career technological resurrection, the truth isn't hidden in riddles. It's hidden in something simpler. And that brings us to the final thought. The world didn't misunderstand the Beatles because of rumors, or conspiracies, or rare recordings. It misunderstood them because legends always look cleaner than reality. Behind the polished albums were four young men learning life in front of millions. They made mistakes. They argued. They chased ideas that didn't always work. They weren't flawless idols. They were restless creators refusing to stand still. That's why their story still fascinates. Not because fans think Paul disappeared, or because people mistook another band for them. Not even because technology brought their voices back decades later. It fascinates because their journey mirrors ours. Ambition, pressure, transformation, loss, comeback, and mystery. What the world never knew about the Beatles isn't some hidden scandal or secret code. It's that their greatness came from the messiness we rarely see. The hunger from Hamburg Nights, the rivalry that sharpened creativity, the risk-taking that scared traditionalists, the friendships that bent but never truly broke, and that's why they endure, not as statues, but as sparks. Every generation finds something new in their echoes. Every rumor becomes a modern campfire tale. Every rediscovered tape feels like a time capsule cracking open. No matter how much we think we know, something always lingers just out of reach. The Beatles didn't just make music, they created a universe. And every time we revisit it, we find new constellations. Maybe that's the real mystery. Not what they hid, but how much they left behind for us to uncover. So the next time you hear a Beatles song, don't just listen for nostalgia. Listen for the hunger, the risk, the change, and the reminder that legends aren't born, they're forged. Bit by bit, song by song, mystery by mystery. And sometimes, even after the curtain falls, they find a way to sing again,